So I haven't made a YouTube video in a long time, and I've kind of been watching a lot of TikTok videos, but I realized that my life story is gonna be too long to just make like 30 TikTok videos. So I decided to just record it and put it on YouTube, and then I'll just leave a link on TikTok if anybody cares. Anyway, I have been trying to figure out what's wrong with me pretty much my entire life. To backtrack to the beginning of time when I was born. So while my mom was pregnant with me, she didn't have really any issues, but she couldn't have natural labor. So even though her water broke and she wasn't having any contractions or anything. So after a while, they were finally like, okay, it's time to do a C-section. We gotta call it. So um, they did the C-section. When they do it, they pull the baby out by the head. But because I am hypermobile, it dislocated my neck and ended up pinching nerves and stuff and paralyzing me on the right side of my body. So from like minute one of being alive, I was already like screwed for life. So I ended up having to do physical therapy to be able to use my right hand at all and learn how to walk over years and all that stuff. But my mom noticed that, when I was a newborn, that I had like a really squeaky cry and I had a bad reflux and I was just a miserable baby. Um, just just generally unhappy. I liked being held and stuff, and then she also noticed that when she changed my diapers, that my legs just kind of like flopped. Like my hips were like, she called me swivel hips when I was younger because my legs were like super loose, which is crazy because now they're really really tight. So once I turned 2 is when I really started having a lot of medical problems. So I had chronic tonsillitis and chronic ear infections, just infection after infection. And so I was always on antibiotics and I started getting sick from being on antibiotics all the time. So when I was 7, they finally were like, time to take the tonsils out. So I got my tonsils and my adenoids removed. I remember that surgery vividly. I remember afterwards in the recovery room, there was like other people in the recovery room, and then I ended up puking, like projectile vomiting blood. And they said it was totally normal because during the surgery, the blood is draining into your stomach, so then you just puke it up afterwards. Years later, I know that that's probably not how it should be done, but whatever. So then, another thing that might be important is that my dad was active duty Army at the time, for my entire life, basically. He was in the Army for 28 years. So, yeah, since before I was born till after I was married and everything. So, we had TRICARE and access to medical care and stuff, and that was part of the thing, is that my dad wanted to make sure that I could get medical care because I was a sickly kid. So then at 20 months old, my brother was born. um he was just as messed up as me, if not more. For me, it was more of like inconveniences. For him, it was life and death. Like, he almost died multiple times from um, birth on. He was 12 pounds when he was born, born in Germany, and my mom almost died during labor. It was all horrible. And then he was just a miserable, colicky baby, super sick, started losing weight, started pooping blood and throwing up. And the doctors were like, he's dying and we don't know why. And my mom ended up feeding him like a gluten-free diet, and then he ended up recovering completely. He was diagnosed with Asperger's, and they thought he had autism, but it turned out that he had celiac disease, and the gluten was basically destroying his brain. Um, okay, so back to me. Uh, so Okay, so 7, I got my tonsils and adenoids removed. I've been complaining of foot pain and bladder pain, and just, I complained a lot. My hips always hurt, my back hurt, everything hurt all the time, and everybody just thought that I was just a big pansy that couldn't handle anything. I couldn't run because every time I ran, my hips would dislocate, but nobody knew exactly what was happening, so they were just like, oh, Megan doesn't want to do anything. She is just trying to get out of stuff or trying not to go to bed or whatever. Um, so then when I was 12, I was diagnosed with, or no, let's go back to 9. So, Thanksgiving of 2001, I was walking around after a bath or something, and my mom noticed red rings all over my legs. So she thought, oh, it's weird, like it doesn't look like ringworm, but it's definitely something. I don't know what it is. And I looked really pale and miserable, and so she finally was like, she called the neighbors, and they were like, no, that's not ringworm, that's something else. And so ended up taking me to the American hospital on post, and they said, oh, she has Lyme disease. um they were like, well, she needs treatment, so they put me on antibiotics, and then I got worse, so I ended up going to a German hospital, and they were like, no, she's dying, like it's infected her whole body. So the Lyme disease spread to my brain, and I ended up with meningitis, so I had to get a spinal tap, and that was the worst experience of my life. It was horrific. No, would not recommend. 10/10 sucks. So did all that. I was in a terminal care ward for dying children in a German hospital, and I was violently ill. I've never been so sick in my life. They gave me high doses of antibiotics, and then for Christmas, I guess, my mom asked if she could take me home for the day. So she brings me home, and I'm just like a shriveled up shell of who I was. And she put me into the bathtub to take a bath, and she noticed that I had red spots all over my body, and that I had, like, my lymph nodes were swollen, but it went all around my neck. So she was like, what is that? That's super weird. So she ran me back to the hospital, the German hospital, and they stopped me at the door and were like, nope, you can't come back in here because you have measles and mumps. So I had measles, mumps, and Lyme disease at the same time, and definitely should have died, probably. It's freaking insane. So it turns out that even though I've been fully vaccinated multiple times, I have no immunity to anything that I've ever been vaccinated for, and I don't get immune to diseases after I have them, so I can still get measles, mumps, rubella, chicken pox. I've had like 3 or 4 times. Each time it's like not as bad, but I still don't want to get chicken pox as a grown ass adult. So, then they sent me home with like meds and stuff, and they were like, do your best or whatever, because in Germany they didn't vaccinate against measles and mumps. So I would have infected the whole terminal care ward and killed a bunch of kids. So they had to send me home and burn all my stuff. So went home, suffered with that for a while. I ended up having like the mumps bad enough that they pretty much stuck for a long time, like years. I had lumps all under my chin and in my cheeks and stuff. It was horrible. So after Lyme disease, then we came back to the States in 2002. We moved to Arizona. So my dad got stationed in Arizona. We came out here, and then I started going to 8th grade, which was my first experience in public school since kindergarten, because I had been homeschooled most of my life. My brother and I are pretty adventurous and stuff, but we were very fragile, so we kept getting hurt or sick or whatever every time we turned around and did something. So we decided to dig an underground house in our backyard. No big deal, totally normal. couple of young 12 and 10-year-olds outside digging an underground house. No big deal. Well, apparently it was a big deal because we ended up stirring up valley fever, and I got it. My brother didn't. So I looked like I had lung cancer, and it was disgusting. So once I started coughing, super sick, and all this stuff, my mom takes me to the on-post hospital, and they do a chest x-ray and see the fungus all through my lungs. Then after that, I do antifungal treatments and albuterol and all this stuff. My lungs are still like not 100% great, which is just freaking awesome. But so I did the valley fever thing, dealt with that, got fixed up. Well, at the same time that I got diagnosed with valley fever, I also got diagnosed with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, which explained my joint pain all over. So my mom was like, okay, she has arthritis, and that's why she's hurting all the time. And then they took x-rays of my feet, and because I kept complaining about my feet, and I was like, no, this is not normal, this is bad. And the spasms were the worst part. It was like Charlie horses in the arches of your feet. Oh my god. And it was for hours every day. Every time I pointed my toes or anything, I walked on my toes for years trying to avoid the pain, and that caused some serious damage. So once they did the x-rays, they said that when you're a baby, you have extra bones in your feet, and mine didn't fuse all the way. So they said, oh, she's just going to need surgery to remove the extra bones and everything will be fine. Well, we ended up getting stationed in Texas before I could get surgery in Arizona, so we moved to Texas. When we get to Texas, start the whole specialist process all over again. They're like, oh, she has arthritis and she had Lyme disease and valley fever, and like all this horrible stuff happened to me, and I was still complaining about my feet. So my mom took me to a specialist orthopedic surgeon, and he took x-rays of my feet, and he was like, oh no, not only does she have like severely flat feet, she has massive bone spurs that are basically shredding the muscles in her feet and causing the spasms, and she's walking on her toes. So now my Achilles tendon was too short, so I had to get my calf lengthened so I could walk normally again. So he did 5 surgeries over 2.5 years. I couldn't walk. I was in a boot or on crutches or in a wheelchair for that entire time, and it sucked because then I was 14 and I started high school, which was like a big deal because, you know, I'd been homeschooled until 8th grade. I went 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th. That was it. That was like my whole school experience. So, so in high school, I was dealing with chronic migraines, to the point, and like my right eye, my pupil dilates really big when I'm having a migraine, which makes no sense, and nobody knows why it does that. I mean, I've got a headache right now, but you can see, like, it's bigger than the other one. And this is the eye that I'm blind in, basically, since I was born, because the right side of my body was trashed. Anyway, so I've always been told that, like, this eye barely works, this eye's perfect. So I would get migraines, and like pressure would build up behind my eye, and then the eye would kind of like bulge out, my pupil would dilate, and it freaked a lot of people out. So I was taking Tylenol like it was candy, and I also had an aversion to water really bad. So I would go a week, as long as I could, surviving on basically like soda, juice, anything but water. I didn't want water because it made me nauseous, and I've been chronically nauseous my whole life. So I avoided water at all costs until I end up in the hospital and I have to get IVs, and then they'd be like, oh, you know, she's just severely dehydrated, she needs to drink water, and I wouldn't do it, and then I would just end up back in the hospital. My mom was getting super pissed at me because I was just avoiding water like the plague. And then so I was going through all that through high school, like chronic pain, surgery after surgery, and then x-rays and MRIs, and trying to like figure out what was causing like a systemic issue. And my mom had been diagnosed with, you know, autoimmune diseases and other stuff that kind of explained parts of my problems, but not the whole thing. And then also like the dislocations and stuff was like strictly me. Nobody else had that kind of hypermobility and stuff. So after all of that, I kind of gave up my senior year and was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. I'm miserable. I don't really care. I'm going to die eventually. It's not that big of a deal. I just was tired of going to the doctor and being poked and prodded and miserable all the time. So I stopped going. I was also told I had a heart murmur from birth. So that's just another part of what's going to happen next. So then I ended up getting married to my first husband after only knowing him for 4 months. You can tell how that went. And then we moved to Nebraska. He was Army National Guard, so I still had TRICARE. And then I started going to the Air Force Base in Omaha for my medical care and was like, all right, maybe I should get looked at and stuff. This cardiologist on the base saw me one time and was like, she has a bicuspid aortic valve, or tricuspid. No, it's supposed to be tricuspid. Bicuspid aortic valve and occlusions in both carotid arteries. She's going to be dead within a year. So I was like, I don't know, whatever. So I kind of just blew it off. And then I ended up having my daughter. So I got pregnant in 2013. That was super stressful. I was really sick for the first 20 weeks, and then I was fine. And then because of my heart murmur and what the doctor had told me, I thought that I couldn't have natural labor, so I thought it would be too dangerous. But they insisted that I could do it and it would be fine. So ended up getting my water broke at like 39 weeks. And then she was born, and she was squeaky. And we didn't think much of it until she stopped breathing a few times for a while at a time, like 30 seconds, turning blue. It was miserable. Turned out she had an airway defect called laryngomalacia, which is basically just your larynx is floppy and it blocks your airway. So you squeak when you inhale, you can't catch your breath. It blocks it so you can't breathe sometimes, and you also have like really bad reflux, which kind of brought us back to my beginning and was like, oh, maybe that was what was going on with me and explains the reflux and all that stuff from when I was a baby. So dealt with that, super stressful, kind of put myself on the back burner. Then I ended up separating from my ex-husband when she was only 3 months old, and then I drove from Nebraska all the way back to Arizona. My dad got stationed in Arizona again, so I came back to Arizona. Then it was basically just trying to get my life right. I was a single mom at that time, and I was stressed out, and I had to find a job and like get back on my feet by myself. And I was living with my parents, which I wasn't a fan of because I was a grown adult and I wanted to take care of myself and my daughter. So ended up getting together with a guy who was a soldier of my dad's in Texas. He actually got stationed in Arizona too, along with a few other friends that we knew from Texas. So it was like everybody I knew from Texas was already here in Arizona, which was really cool. So we started dating, and then so I was just focused on that stuff. I didn't really care about my health at that time. So in 2015, I started having more pain. My back was killing me, and then I started having like upper right quadrant abdominal pain. So I'm like, okay, maybe my gallbladder's messed up. So I go to the ER, and they say, oh, there's some sludge in your gallbladder, but it's really not like that bad. So they didn't think that I had like any real issue, but they said, oh, you can just get it removed, it's fine, because apparently you can just yank a gallbladder without any testing or consideration. So made an appointment with the surgeon. He said, oh, we're gonna do a HIDA scan. Never did that, never got any scans, no more testing. And he just scheduled the surgery and was like, fuck it, she doesn't need a gallbladder, it's fine. So got my gallbladder removed in April of 2015. In May of 2015, I had my first pancreatitis attack. Didn't know what was going on. It was the worst pain I ever felt, but it only lasted for 20 minutes. So I kind of just blew it off and thought, oh, if that was like a one-time thing, I don't know what caused that. It's weird. And then it started happening every few months, and then once a month, and then longer. So then I was having attacks on the daily for an hour at a time. And at that point, I couldn't do it anymore. So one day, I ended up eating one of those apple salads from Wendy's, which was like my favorite food. I ate that, and then I started having a pancreatitis attack, and I didn't know what it was, so I just kind of like, I was like, oh, it's only 20 minutes, I'll just go sit in my bedroom and cry it out for a while. So I went back into the bedroom and I was chilling, and I made a YouTube video of me having an attack. So at the time, I had kind of did my own research and found out that I thought I had sphincter of Oddi dysfunction, because I had been in the hospital a few times and all my tests came back negative, and then they thought I was just a drug seeker. So I was like, okay, there's nothing gonna kill me, so I don't know what's wrong. And then my doctor, my gastro, was like, okay, well, go to the Mayo Clinic and get an actual diagnosis. So this day, I eat the salad, and I start filming the YouTube video of me having an attack, and I think, oh, okay, it's going to be 20 minutes of me having an attack, and then I'll be done, and I can move on with my life. But it ends that. So after 2 hours of the most excruciating pain I had ever felt in my life, I went, called my dad, and I was like, I can't do this. I'm alone with my daughter. She's like 18 months old. Somebody needs to come take me to the hospital. So my dad came and got me, took me to the hospital. We dropped my daughter off at daycare, took me to the hospital. They ran all the blood work, and they were like, no, you have pancreatitis. You could have died. So they start pumping me full of meds and trying to get my pain under control. And finally, like, it felt like somebody saw something really wrong with me and decided to actually give a crap. So I was really happy, honestly, because I had been telling people how much pain I was in and nobody believed me, which sucked. So I was in the hospital for 3 days, lost a whole bunch of weight. I wasn't allowed to eat anything, and then finally got discharged, came home, and that was in September of 2015, I think. Yeah. No, it was 2016, because I didn't even know any of this stuff before my brother died. Anyway, okay, so to backtrack, I was having all this pain in 2015 after my gallbladder was removed. My brother was diagnosed with chronic pancreatitis back in 2014 when he was 19 years old, and he had his first pancreatitis attack. They blamed it on him being an alcoholic, but then 2 years later, or 1 year later, I started having pancreatitis attacks, and I don't drink. So I haven't really drank at all since high school. So since I was like 18, 19 years old, I haven't even been drunk in years. So they're like, okay, well, that doesn't make sense. Why would two people in the same family have pancreatitis within a year of each other? And it was chronic for both of us. But I didn't know that what I was experiencing was pancreatitis at the time. So my brother was diagnosed, but he would call me and be like, hey, you gotta take me to the emergency room. I'm in too much pain. I can't handle it. So I'd take him in, and I thought, oh, it's just stomach pain. He's just being a big pansy or whatever. And then he'd get diagnosed with pancreatitis, and they'd take care of him and then discharge him, and we do this all the time. And then when I start having the pain, one night I had a drink at a bar. I had like one margarita, and the pain hit me, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna ride this out for 20 minutes. And it just kept going and going. And so I called my brother, and I was like, please come get me. And then he said, when he got to the bar, I was out of my mind in pain, collapsing on the floor. He picked me up, threw me in the backseat of my boyfriend's car, and was taking me home. And as we're driving, he's like, did it start out feeling like heartburn? And I said, yeah, like it burns in my chest. And then the pain just like radiates to the right, and then it's just like a massive, like if your organs are like crushing themselves, like a cramp, but the worst cramp you can possibly imagine. And it doesn't let up. There's no like waves of it. No, it's one solid cramp for an hour or longer or whatever. So once he told me that he was feeling the exact same pain, that's when I suspected pancreatitis. But in 2016, in April of 2016, we went out. We were having a great time. Everything was fine. Um, we came back. Um, and then my brother was gonna take his motorcycle to go to Walmart, get some cash to go pay a friend for something, and then come home. He lived in an RV behind my house. We were best friends, so we lived together our whole lives except for the 2 years I was in Nebraska. Um, so he lived right behind me, and then that night he never came home. So I just thought, oh, maybe he just spent the night at somebody's house or something. And then the next day he didn't come home. And then that Tuesday he never showed up, and I said I was gonna file like a missing person report. And right when I decided to do that, my mom called me and told me to come over to her house. So I went over there. It was like right down the street, and there was a cop there, and he said that my brother had been in a motorcycle accident, and didn't survive, which was very traumatizing and fucked me up for a really long time. So that was in April of 2016, and then my health dropped. Like, I went off the deep end. Um, I had always been really conscious of my diet and exercise and like taking care of myself. After that, nope, didn't care at all. It was done. So I ended up having like a mental health crisis. I've been suicidally depressed since I was 14. But it came and went, and I was manic sometimes and whatever. I went to therapy a few times, but this was like new level. So it was the most traumatizing thing I've ever been through in my life. And then finding out that he died the night that I had dropped him off to get his motorcycle, and had been dead for 2 days before he was found. That added to everything. And then his body was robbed, and it was all fucking crazy. So, oh my god, this video is so long. So, after he died, I gave up on everything. But then a few months later, I decided to like really buckle down and take care of myself. I bought life insurance for everybody in my family. My boyfriend at the time proposed to me. We ended up getting legally married in September. He deployed to Afghanistan as a contractor for 9 months at the same time. I quit smoking cigarettes. I had no alcohol whatsoever. I was going to get my life together because I didn't want to die like my brother did. So the only problem is that a lot of his health problems could have helped me get diagnosed way earlier, and I didn't know. So I just kind of like brushed it all off until 2018. So through 2016, 2017, I was pretty much just dealing with my emotional trauma, mental health problems, the deployment for 9 months, and then raising my daughter by myself for a while, moving into a new house that we bought right when he left, and then taking care of 4 dogs, or 3 dogs at the time. And then my health was declining, and the pancreatitis was just worse and worse all the time. So my husband ended up coming back in 2017, and we ended up deciding to have like a real wedding and all this stuff. I had gained about 80 pounds in a year. No longer was focused on my diet at all, didn't care about any of that, and we ended up having our real wedding in October of 2017. So at this point, I'm still like dealing with the chronic problems: joint pain, misery, heart problems, POTS, migraines, vision issues. I was a mess. But then in April of 2018, I ended up getting fired from my last job because I've never been able to hold down a job because I'm too sick to work. And my boss told me that she thought that I was faking my disability, and that I wasn't really as sick as I thought I was, or whatever. No, it's not true at all, I promise you. So she let me go and said, maybe disability is the right way to go for you. I was like, great. Okay, I'm going to be 25 on disability. Anyway, so I got fired in early April, like April 1st. And then I was home, doing the stay-at-home mom thing with my daughter. Everything was cool. And then Mother's Day rolls around, and I start throwing up. which is not highly unusual. I throw up randomly, but not multiple times in a day. So, like, throwing up, like, what is going on? And my husband was like, are you pregnant? And I said, no, I don't think that's what's happening. That doesn't sound right. The dates don't line up. Doesn't make sense. So I said, oh, I'll go prove him wrong and take a pregnancy test. So ran to the bathroom, took a pregnancy test. I'm standing there looking at the stick, and they've got, the first line, the control line shows up, and I'm waiting, and then I realize I'm left-handed, and I'm holding this stick upside down, and the control line is actually the test line, and it popped up first because I am very pregnant. Uh, yeah, so I ended up violently ill for months. Went and got an ultrasound that week. Found out I was 7 weeks pregnant, which for me is shocking because I don't ever. I've had a few miscarriages and stuff, and I always find out I'm pregnant like the day of my period being due. So for me to go weeks without knowing was mind blowing. So I was 7 weeks pregnant when I found out. Then I had a diagnosis of hyperemesis, which was horrendous. When I was 8 weeks pregnant, I was throwing up every 10 minutes tops for 3 hours. There was literally nothing in my body. I lost 20 pounds in 3 weeks. I was so sick, so dehydrated, miserable. The rest of my pregnancy was a nightmare. I ended up super sick, gestational diabetes, throwing up all the time. I was eating constantly, and I wasn't gaining any weight because everything was going through me, or I was throwing it up. So I ate 19 times a day to the point where, like, my mouth was raw from eating all the time, and I was exhausted and so sick. So then when I was 24 weeks, got diagnosed with diabetes. I was super pissed about that because my brother was a type 1 diabetic, so I've been terrified of diabetes my whole life. So when I found out, I was horrified. So they put me on insulin, and I was scared. And then found out later that because of the gestational diabetes and my weight or whatever, because at that point I was now 185 pounds. No, 210 pounds. So I'd gained like 20 pounds back or whatever. So they told me that I had polyhydramnios. So the amniotic fluid is supposed to be between like 8 and 12 centimeters. Mine was, well, when I first got diagnosed, it was 26. And then it just steadily went up and up and up. And then at 36 weeks, I was at 44. They said I had about 7 liters of amniotic fluid. I was fainting constantly. I had multiple migraines, stroke symptoms. My heart rate was a mess. Every time I laid down, I passed out. Still vomiting, still not, controlling my weight, still not able to eat normal food. It was horrible. For 5 months of my pregnancy, I literally survived on nothing but Coca-Cola, which also destroyed my teeth. So I went to the dentist, and he said, you did the 3 worst possible things you could do to your teeth, which was puking too much, not brushing enough because you can't brush your teeth when you have HG, and then drinking soda constantly. I destroyed my teeth and melted the enamel off of them so badly that it got to the point where it was excruciatingly painful to brush my teeth with any kind of toothpaste besides like kids bubblegum toothpaste. So that just like added to the drama. So when I found out that my fluids were at 44 centimeters, I was done. I was done being pregnant. So I sent a nastygram to my OB, and I was like, get this baby out of me. But right when I clicked the send button on this like 2-page email about how I was done being pregnant, she called me at the same time and said, you're done being pregnant. You're being induced on Tuesday, which just happened to be my birthday. So my husband started a new job on December 3rd. I was told I was being induced on December 11th, which is my birthday. and I was ecstatic. I was so freaking happy. So finally I had like a end game. Like I knew what was going to happen. I wasn't going to be pregnant for much longer. I only had like 5 days left. Then they told me it was going to be Wednesday. So I was like, okay, whatever, the day after my birthday. So finally, like, I was done with all that crap. Went in, got induced at like 9 a.m., something like that, I think. Um, and the induction went to hell. So the doctor comes in and she says, "Oh, well, we're gonna, poke a small hole in your water and, let it slowly like trickle out. Because if it ruptures, it can be very dangerous because the cord could prolapse and he'd lose his oxygen and it would be really bad." So I was freaking out, and she literally barely touched me and my water broke completely. Gone. It was the most insane shit I've ever felt in my life. But I cannot tell you how relieved I was, because I had so much fluid that my uterus was trying to rupture. And I honestly don't think I could have gone another week without probably doubling my fluid again and my uterus trying to rupture. So, once the water broke, oh my God, I didn't even care that I was in labor. I was so fine with everything. But the problem was, every time I had a contraction, because he was used to floating around in so much fluid, that once it was gone, he was starting to be crushed and he couldn't deal with the pressure. So his heart rate would drop every time I had a contraction. So I labored for 9 hours, something like that. Yeah, labored for 9 hours, and then I was like, what are we doing here? And the doctor came in and said, "Look, you're not even in like active labor yet. You're barely dilated to like a 4, and the baby's not tolerating it. So we need to do a C-section." And I was freaking out. So I got my epidural, and he hit a nerve in my spine, and that made me jump. And then he stabbed me in the other side of my spine with the same needle, and he was like, "You can't jump like that." And I was like, "Fuck, dude." And so he told me that I was gonna have to get like a blood patch in my spine, and I'm already freaked out about spine stuff because of my spinal tap when I was a kid. So I don't like needles near my back, and this is my second epidural, so I was absolutely horrified, and that it didn't go as smoothly as the first time I had a baby. So get into the operating room, and within like 30 seconds, they're already starting to like numb me. I'm freaking out. I start puking, and I'm numb up to like here because they had to move my epidural up because he had punctured the wrong part of my spine. And they didn't explain anything that was going on. All I knew was I was getting numb, and I didn't know why, and I started freaking out. So the second anesthesiologist wasn't telling me crap about anything, and that was freaking me out even more. And then they were like, "Oh, do you feel this?" And I was like, "Nope." And they just started slicing me open. Called my husband into the room, and like 5 seconds later, the baby was out. And he was perfect. I mean, but I heard his first cry, and I knew right away that he had the same airway defect that my daughter and I did. So, and he was 3 weeks early, so I was really scared. I was 37 weeks in 1 day, so he was almost the same size my daughter was at full term, and so that kind of like threw me off. So he was great, perfect, everything was fine. I noticed that he had the airway defect, and so I started paying attention and watching him. He had a couple of breath holding spells, but I was on it, like I got the appointments done, I did everything I needed to do. I got him into a nice ENT in Phoenix, and I was on top of it, and he ended up getting his airway surgery at 7 months old instead of having to suffer for 2 years trying to outgrow it like my daughter did, and she didn't handle that well. So that's 2018. While I was pregnant, I was experiencing so many crazy symptoms that made no sense. A lot of neurological stuff, numbness, freaky migraines, paralysis. Like, it was nuts. So I started looking into other ideas for what was actually like wrong with me. So my insurance has like this nurse program where they call you